This is Bonjour Chai, the Smoke and Mirrors edition. I'm Avi in Montreal, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovi in Toronto. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, the wildfires are still raging, and we examine what role Jewish organizations should play in the climate discussion. Plus, we examine kosher burgers, Jewish rolls, and lots more other things coming right up. Phoebe, how's it going?
It's going well. How about you, Avi?
It's been smoky here. It's getting smokier. We're going to have an interview later on with somebody about the Jewish view on this and Jewish organizations. But other than that, it's summertime. So, the jazz festival is starting. Other festivals are starting. It's a beautiful time to be alive in Canada, in Montreal, in the summertime.
That's something.
Yeah. How have you been?
It's going well here in Toronto. Today is kindergarten graduation. So audio listener type people cannot see, but I wore a dress today. So I'm dressed up for the event of the season. It's happening in the middle of the day, so there probably will not be a ton of people there, parents at least, but I'm excited about it.
Will there be juice boxes in tall flutes celebrating?
Apparently it's going to be something called freezies.
Oh, yes, that's the Canadian.
Is that the tube that's frozen? Okay, yes. Because my daughter was asking me if I'd ever had a freezie, and I didn't know what a freezie was. Okay, fair enough. They seem very excited about it, the children.
So, mere hours after I talked about that tweet last week about my nachas about kosher restaurants, I get an email from a colleague about this new restaurant that's opening up in Midtown Manhattan.
Selling freezies, presumably?
No. Selling the opposite. Selling a $175 gold-plated burger.
Ah, okay.
I sent you this article. Did you have a chance to look at this?
I did. I skimmed through it. It seems not very nice. I don't know. It's a style of cuisine that I've definitely read about before. I don't know if I've ever personally been in a restaurant serving it. It's like tacky food. I don't know.
Yeah. So
it's like I don't know. It's the sort of McMansion of food approach.
Oh my God, yes, that's the McMansion of food.
It has its audience, I'm sure. It's if I really step back, that's no better or worse than spending a ton of money on any other food. Ethically, it's all a bit ridiculous. But it just seems a little silly, like a gold leaf hamburger or whatever. Yeah,
so look, full disclosure, I happen to know the proprietor, Naftali Abenayim. He was my study partner in yeshiva in high school. He was a really nice guy. He seems like a really nice guy. But he seems to have made this turn into restaurateur.
From hat maker
to restaurateur from many other things. And I have to say, and he's a nice guy, but it's kind of douchey restaurateur sort of cuisine. And I don't know what to make of it. When you called it the McMansion of food, I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly it. He had a small dairy restaurant in Teaneck, New Jersey called Mocha Bleu, which became, he had a place then called Mocha Burger. He has Mocha Red, and now he has Mocha Burger Luxe. And
Can
this
I
is
just
what's
ask
opening up in Midtown.
A quick question about this? Because
please.
Mocha is a beverage that I sometimes enjoy, involving coffee or espresso, milk, and chocolate and sugar. Does that name evoke a gold-plated hamburger to you?
So, according to the article, he named the dairy restaurant Mocha Bleu after the blue and brown jacquard wallpaper that adorned the walls.
Okay.
And I presume that because it was a dairy-based restaurant, Mocha made sense. It was more of a cafe-style look and vibe. But you're right. This is what happens when you get trapped into a naming convention that doesn't make sense anymore. Mocha is a coffee and dairy a milk-based beverage, and it doesn't really fit into this burger steakhouse sort of vibe.
That gets to a question I have for you about this, though, that's super Jewish, okay?
Please.
The part that jumped out at me, first I'm okay, this kind of seems like a tacky restaurant, whatever. I'm obviously extremely far from the target audience. I go and have Vietnamese food in Chinatown as my preferred meal out, so I'm probably not going to this restaurant. However, what interested me was this whole question of the kosher cheeseburger and the fake cheese on a hamburger and why, and because according to this article, there's controversy around whether that's okay or not. Is there indeed controversy about this?
I think there may have been controversy at some point in time, but so many kosher restaurants are doing it now.
I see.
You know, once the vegans have done a good job of making like vegan cheese, or at least meltable vegan cheese sauces, and you often see it on kosher like menus as like XEE like Z or something, like cheese or something like that, sort of not quite cheese, and people know that that's what it is. And there's an understanding that if it's a kosher restaurant and it's serving you like a cheeseburger, it's not real cheese, but that's there. And he's, I think, drumming up this idea that like, oh, I've invented this thing and I'm the source of all these things. I mean, look, he imports his beef from Uruguay because he cannot source kosher hormone and antibiotic free range grass-fed cattle within the US. And he spent 9 months experimenting to come up with the special short rib blend that he uses for his burgers, right? I'm going to quote to you from a website called Grow and Behold, who are great meat providers in the US, and right away on their first line of their website says, our promise to you, raised on pasture, no hormones, no growth promoting antibiotics, and they're kosher. So the stuff is available in America. He's just cheap and doesn't want to spend the money on, and rather bring it in from Uruguay and pretends that like this is the only thing that he's bringing in, like nobody else does this.
I mean, the whole thing seems a little, I'm sorry, I hate to say this since this is your friend, but it seems just a little
I haven't
silly.
spoken to him in 25 years, so please.
I mean, the way, like, because the article's like, what's the point of it? Like, who's going to order this? And he says something like, people who feel that they are special, and everybody feels that they're special, according to the article, and it's like in the quote or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, everybody does feel that they're special, but not everybody wants to eat an $175
burger.
Golden hamburger. So while I do still think that this comparison with a McMansion holds, I also think a lot of times people criticize one expensive thing because it's tacky and not another expensive thing that they think is more tasteful. And I think like there's ultimately, you know, if people are choosing to spend money on indulging themselves rather than whatever, giving it to charity, you know, like I don't know that it makes a huge difference which way they go with it. What did strike me though, another thing about this particular high-end kosher hamburger was I just was reading this morning a review in the New York Times, I think by Pete Wells, of something called Superiority Burger, which is a very different sounding New York restaurant that's that would be of interest to people who are certain levels of kosher, not others. It's vegetarian and vegan, so different, you know, like so somebody who's avoiding, you know, pork and shellfish would be able to do it, but somebody probably looking for certifications from rabbis, perhaps not. But in any case, that review describes a very, very sort of the moment New York vibe, I suppose, right? Like a certain type of atmosphere. So this is a restaurant that doesn't use meat, right? So it's also a hamburger restaurant. And when I think of like 2023 New York City hamburger restaurant, I would more think something like that, if that makes sense. So this seems like a little bit not, I don't mean that things can't be behind the curve, but that it does sound like it is a little behind the curve.
Look, kosher consumers are always behind the curve.
Yes, that may be.
And we're always, you know, being given things that were cool 10 years ago. I think a lot of Jews still think sushi is cool. Sushi is so de rigueur in a lot of Jewish events and a lot of Jewish restaurants.
And often
a lot
mixed
of kosher
in
restaurants.
with other cuisines.
Yes,
in ways
pizza
that
and
are
sushi
unexpected.
is like the standard thing you would expect to find in a basic kosher restaurant. Because it's dairy and it's easy and whatever. And, you know, I think that the market has moved far away from the non-kosher market, has moved very far away from these performance-based spaces, like even Salt Bay, which is like clearly what this thing is modeled off of, right? The guy who does the spreading of salt extravagantly bouncing it off of his like elbow and serving $1,500 steaks that are often gold wrapped and stuff. Like he's the only one doing this right now, and that move in that sphere of performative food and not food that tastes amazing has moved, like the world has moved far away from that. Even like we're even turning away from like food as art and the whole Noma like Alinea sort of like space of like fancy dining at $300-$500 a person for extremely elevated food. Even
or like the molecular gastronomy or whatever.
Yeah,
which
modernist cuisine.
I'm very knowledgeable about this. I'm eating it right now. I don't even know it flew into my mouth.
And like they're moving towards food that is a little more honest, food that is a little more like, let's be aware of what's on the plate. Let's not necessarily spend a ton of time or energy putting effort into like the decor. We'd rather just serve you something that's a little real. And this does not feel real at all. And this is just behind the curve. But if that's what the kosher consumer wants to be and be behind the curve and people want to spend that money. Like you said, I happen to think that it is extremely fake and McMansion-y when it comes to food. Even he was touting this 10-foot tall sculpture that he has, this cause sculpture that is there. Like it is invariably going to be fake because a 1 foot tall cause sculpture costs $2,000. And the last time I saw a life-size or bigger cause sculpture was at the Brooklyn Museum, right? He is not having one in a midtown kosher restaurant that is going to be a real one. He's just bought a fake and just put it up there to show that what's going on. This is who he is doing stuff for. And I'm like, great, you're a wonderful guy.
He's Canadian. He is Canadian. But yes. I have a question because this is, the Canadian Jewish news and all. Is there in Toronto, if somebody, or in Montreal, or in Winnipeg, or in Halifax, or wherever, Vancouver, is there a gold-plated, perhaps $200 to account for exchange rates?
I highly doubt it.
Hamburger.
There is Chops, which the less I will say about it, the better, which is a restaurant in Montreal, and there's probably a Toronto equivalent, but I am not going to talk much about Chops for fear of incriminating myself or other people, and it's a wonderfully upscale priced restaurant, and that's all I'll say about that.
Fair enough.
Phoebe, what's been crossing your radar these days?
Well, speaking of food and restaurants, there's a certain fictitious Pakistani restaurant in New York that has been on my mind. How's that for a segue?
Oh, yes, of course. Please tell us more.
So there's, I don't know if everybody who listens is a Seinfeld aficionado to the extent, certainly, that I am. But, so this is very much caught up in my head with the soup Nazi plotline, but there are two different plot lines, okay? So let's keep these all apart. There was I think it's probably one of the later seasons of Seinfeld, Babu. Okay, Babu Bhatt, a Pakistani restaurateur who Jerry tries to help, but ends up, I guess, getting deported back to Pakistan. And these are scenes that even at the time were a bit cringe-inducing, I suppose, to maybe some audiences, maybe not others. It was one of these things that one of the sort of sitcom you wouldn't see it today kind of thing.
This was the episode with the famous lines and I will not use the accent, but Jerry said the wheels were in motion, the wheels were in motion, the wheels were not in motion. And when he offers him a Snapple, he goes, no thanks, too fruity.
That's correct. That is correct. Yes. And I had, I remember this well because this also was very much like Seinfeld was just before 9/11, and then there was a lot of discussion just after about Islamophobia, how the U.S. was behaving in terms of the war on terror and all of these things, and it all got very wrapped up in this became really one of the sort of like the problematic Seinfeld, Pablomatic even, perhaps.
Sure.
Anyway, but the point is that but then it just recently crossed my Twitter feed, somebody pointing out that Brian George, the British actor who plays Babu, I'm on his Wikipedia page now, okay? He was born in Jerusalem in 1952 to Jewish parents of Lebanese, Indian, and Iraqi descent who had immigrated to Israel, okay? And he, also, a year after his birth, the family moved from Israel to London and then in 1966 to Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And he went to a public co-ed high school in Toronto and attended but did not graduate from the University of Toronto. So this is my big Canadian Jewish news that
you are
I am
low-key
not
blowing
exactly
my mind right now.
I am not breaking it in the sense that this has probably been on Wikipedia all along. But what interested me about this specifically is that when you talk about, not you, Avi, but when one talks about the Jewish history of Seinfeld or Jewish representation in Seinfeld, whatever, I had never heard this mentioned. I had never heard the fact that Babu is Jewish. And what does it all mean? I mean, it's a little obvious what it all means, but anyway, what do you think?
I mean, I think that what it all means is that when Seinfeld was being produced, nobody was really like looking for Jews in all the right corners or all the wrong corners, and there was no question about people's backgrounds. These were bit actors. These were character actors, and
there were questions about people's backgrounds, but only if they were white, I think, or if they came across as white.
Oh, meaning you couldn't pass as white.
I think there was a tremendous amount of interest in who on Seinfeld was Jewish. I think that was.
And this never came up.
This never came up, and I suspect it's because Babu was presented as a non-white character, and
but he is of Iraqi Lebanese descent.
Yes, and that's
right.
The
thing.
So here's the thing: does that mean whether or not somebody of his descent is reading as white in the U.S. context is extremely contextual, and the reason I say this is another sort of vaguely Jewish media story that it's a bit old, but I'm still a little bit fixated on it. The man repeller blogger Leandra Medine Cohen has very similar ancestry to Brian George. She was sort of canceled as a problematic white woman in the sort of 2021 cycle of all of that. Yeah, so it's interesting. It's all very contextual. Yeah.
It's interesting. Like we're no stranger to the discussion on Bonjour Chai about who gets to play who. Does somebody, who gets to play somebody who is non-white, who presumably is coming from Indian background, and this person is Lebanese and Iraqi, but is Canadian.
Pakistani.
Pakistani as well. So there you go.
No, I mean Seinfeld, the character was Pakistani.
I meant Southeast Asia in general.
Fair enough.
Yes, yeah. I stand corrected. And I stand humbled by
the Wikipedia. Yes. I'm sorry, but this just to say this Wikipedia page mentions about like 20 different nationalities to do with the character, the person, where the person lived. It's like there's no shame in being a little muddled in this. I think how would one not be?
This is. I don't know much about Man. I remember that Man Repeller was around in the like online fashion revolution, which they called nowadays in the men's world was the hashtag menswear era, and Man Repeller was there as the like female counterpoint to that. You should be canceled for being problematic 100% if you are a toxic, and I don't mean that in the technical term. If you are a person who contributes to a problematic workplace, yes, you should absolutely be canceled. But I don't know. This is the question of
the relevant thing here. I think is not whether her workplace was toxic or not. A question about which I have zero opinion because I've not looked into it. But rather, she was lumped in culturally in all these articles about the girl bosses with she was another one of the white ladies who was being bad.
Yeah. So look, I mean, the question
is, was she a white lady? And she calls herself one.
How much does your religion, right, play into your whiteness or non-whiteness? And this is where whiteness as a category ceases to be like easy and useful to hold on to, because somebody who is as waspy as they get and wears their Nantucket Reds, and goes to, Hyannisport like this, like the whitest of the white, and decides to convert to Judaism, do they no longer become white in the eyes of the people who say that Jews are a ethnic minority?
Well, you can just point to Ivanka Trump for that. I mean,
sure.
Is Ivanka Trump how to even put this? I don't even know. I don't even know where I'm going with this. But the point is that I just found this interesting when I was thinking about, I certainly don't think there was any problem with that actor playing Babu in terms of it's not the exact same. I don't think that would be, I don't know that anybody would be objecting on that level. I think the objections to the character were more the sort of the accent and also just the kind of the sort of
that's
very,
not something...
it was this whole thing where the show was a very, very white picture of New York, and when they did break with it, it got extra torn apart because did they do it in the right way?
This is the part that I think is weird about this, and with this, maybe we should wrap this up because we're going far away from all of this. What right does one have to have an accent if they are...
No accents are allowed.
If they have that ethnicity, right? And the fact is, he probably has some, authentic connection to the accent, to the type of character that he's playing, but he's playing a stereotype. This is not like Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's level, right? A white person playing a really, really Asian stereotype that's problematic.
Kim's Convenience, the parents speaking.
Sure.
Yeah, so that would be to give a sort of more contemporary Canadian angle. I love Kim's Convenience and I really enjoyed it.
As do I.
Or I should say enjoyed it, because I guess it ended, and it has a very handsome actor in it who's now a big movie star. But yeah, the accents that the parents have, apparently some people find this a problem. I think most don't, though. I think it's because how the alternative would be having them speak Korean to each other.
But the difference is there in that case, this is a performance. This is a script that is written by Koreans, right, for the wider audience, but that they're able to police and to work with this. Babu, in this case, is reading lines that are highly stereotypical, written by white people without, or by non-Pakistani people that are not necessarily consulting with Pakistani people to say, like, hey,
are you saying there wasn't a sensitivity reader on Seinfeld?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either.
Speaking of problematic roles, this happened yesterday, and I really, it threw me for a loop, and I really want to hear your take on this. My kid loves the Segal Centre. All my kids love the Segal Centre, which is, I guess, the equivalent of the Koffler Centre in Toronto, except that it's not multidisciplinary. It's mainly just a theatre space. It's Jewish. It's Jewish funded. It's funded by the community in part, I believe, and it has a mandate to do some Jewish programming, but it's always been seen as like the Jewish, theater space. And lately they've been moving away from certain practices, which I may not be happy with, but that's like their thing. So they've started doing some select performances on Shabbat when they used to not do that. They don't serve kosher exclusively anymore, meaning it's available as an option for certain events, but not necessarily the default is always everything is going to be kosher. But it was always like the Jewy space, and that's where my kids go to do Yiddish theater, and that's where the Yiddish theater resides, and all of that stuff is there. And so she signed up for theater camp right at the Segal Centre, and she comes back from her first day. It's a 2-week thing where you learn on the first day what the play is, and you rehearse it, and you perform it on the last day at the end of 2 weeks. So it's 2 full weeks of rehearsal for one play. And she comes home and tells us that the play that they're going to be doing this year at the Segal Centre is The Nightmare Before Christmas. And I was thinking to myself, one of the reasons why I send my kid to the Segal Centre is that I don't imagine that I have to have a conversation with my kid about the fact that The Nightmare Before Christmas is a play that she has to perform because that's the camp play. And I find out that that's actually not the case. Now, am I over the top here? Is this a valid consideration that I should be assuming that a Jewish affiliated institution should not be performing The Nightmare Before Christmas? Or am I right? Help me out here. Or there's there nuance? Let's hope that there's nuance.
Say right into the Bintel briefs to ask, because I feel like they would probably have the more intricate version of the answer. I mean, my question, I'm going to respond to your question with some questions myself, as is tradition, of course. I would wonder, as somebody familiar somewhat with equivalent institutions in New York, not so, I don't, if you ask me where on a map is this Koffler Center, I could not begin to tell you, so I'm not going to be able to say much about that. But what I would wonder is, what are the demographics of this program, specifically of the children in the program? Because what I would say is, if this is a mainly Jewish, observant or not, let's set that question aside. If this is a sort of a Jewish summer camp, it's a super weird choice. If it's a camp in a building that is roughly affiliated with the Jewish history, but that today's demographics in that neighborhood, whatever, if it's not really a Jewish summer camp in any sense, it's just that those are the demographics. We were living in a minority Jewish country. So
to place it geographically, it's a building that sits between the Federation Building, across the street from it, and behind it, the Jewish Y, right? The JCC, right? What we call the YMYWHA, the Sylvan Adams JCC, whatever you're going to call it. So it is squarely in the heart of the Jewish campus of buildings. it is historically Jewish. It has internally a mandate to do Jewish-themed, pieces at least once a year. That is where the Jewish Arts Mentorship is housed, where our former co-host Alana Zakon just graduated from an arts mentorship that was called the Jewish Arts Mentorship. That is where the Yiddish theater is. That is what the youth programs have a program called Yaya, Yiddish Young Actors for Yiddish something for young actors, Yiddish audiences. That's what it is, something like that. And so there's definitely a Jewish theme. If you ask me the demographic of the kids that are there in the summer camp, I asked my daughter, she goes, not everybody's Jewish. So there are definitely non-Jews that are there, but there are definitely a lot of Jews that are in that summer camp. Is everybody kosher? No. Is everybody Shomer Shabbat? She's the only one I would say that is actually keeping Shabbat on a weekly basis, or in an Orthodox way. And so that's the demographic and that's the geography.
Mm-hmm. So this is interesting. The only sort of Canadian comparison I could have is before the pandemic, we were living close, sort of more centrally downtown in Toronto, and the daycare we were going to send my older daughter to, but then we moved and we're not living near it, so we didn't, is a JCC daycare that we toured. And what I learned about that is it's not that it's all Jewish families, but it's definitely Jewish themed. So if there's going to be a theme, if there's going to be a cultural theme, it's going to be Jewish. It doesn't mean that everybody is an observant Jew. It doesn't even mean that everybody is Jewish at all. It's just that this is a Jewish place. It's it's the Miles Nadal JCC that I'm talking about. So I guess what I would say in terms of your question and how this relates is just, this does not strike me as very Jewish themed, and more to the point, it doesn't seem like one of these sort of neutral themed things that could go either way. It does seem like it's also a gratuitous, just not to be all seasonal, but summer is a time when Jews are generally not doing a whole to be a Jew at Christmas discourse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why, of all things to think about in June, I don't know.
There are thousands of plays and they could have picked anything else, right? And I know that it's a fun play, but there are thousands of other fun plays that they could have picked. And I don't know. I feel like I'm in the right here, that this is not the appropriate play that they should have picked. And I feel like I'm stuck because I'm not going to tell my kid to not go to theater camp anymore, especially she loves theater and she's going to get to be part of this. But I don't know what to help me.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this is the nature of being, a minority community in a bigger place. And
this is why you have institutions that you get to have your say.
I think I would be curious how this was selected. I think, and I say this not in the sort of euphemistic, so we can get that person. No, not at all. More just I'm just curious about the process, because it does jump out as something that probably, I doubt you're the only person who's reacting a little to this, because to me this does not break down on secular versus observant lines at all. I think Jewish sort of squickiness about Christmas is an extremely common secular Jewish feeling too, or just other denominations. I don't think you would have to be Orthodox to care about this. I think it's different from saying could an observant Jew play a character in a in a mainstream production. You're right, this is a Jewish institution. So yeah, I would be curious about it. I would think that the practical question would be, what do you want going forward? Does this tell you what would you want from them going forward, assuming you go there next year?
I hate to use this word, be sensitivity, right? But I want to bear minimum of awareness that there are Jewish people who might not celebrate Christmas, or have certain plays, I don't think they should be performing Jesus Christ Superstar, however wonderful a play it might be.
It would be, I'm sorry, not to make light, but it would be extremely funny if it's that the following year.
And then the following year, there's a musical version of The Last Temptation of Christ, right? I don't think that these are plays that I want to see at the Segal Centre. But yeah, anyways, that's my thing.
Yeah. I think I'm with you on this. I think it's weird. I also I'm much more familiar with the scenario of it's some secular institution that's not acknowledging Jewish cultural and religious practices where it's like you want to pester, but also you have to acknowledge the demographics. But here, this seems like a Jewish institution serving Jews, and just that kind of put its foot in it in this particular case. My hunch is that they will be embarrassed and feel a bit silly about this, and that they will probably not do it again.
I hope so. And on that note, let us move on to our interview with Rabbi Yonatan Neril about Jewish institutions and the climate crisis, right after we hear from our sponsor.
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
When I moved back to Canada about 10 years ago, one of the things that I realized was that we don't have hurricanes, we don't have any other storms, we don't have a lot of extreme heat. And as a result, the weather felt kind of good, and we didn't have to think about sustainability at a local level. Not to say that we shouldn't be thinking about sustainability at a global level, but it was always a point of pride to be able to go to Americans and say, yeah, our neighborhoods are safe from climate issues or whatever, or our cities are safe, our country is relatively, not going to be as affected. But wildfires have changed that. We're in the middle of wildfire season. Canadian wildfires have affected large parts of all of North America in the past little while, and we're not yet at the end of this season's wildfires, and that means that we think about this stuff a lot. In the past, we've had Tzipora Berman on to talk about why this is a Jewish issue, and today, because it's on the front of our minds, we decided to revisit this discussion with a new perspective. Joining us is Rabbi Yonatan Neril. He's the founder of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. He's also the co-author of the Eco Bible, an ecological commentary on the Torah, along with Rabbi Leo D. Rabbi Yonatan, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Thank you. Great to be here.
One of the things that we've been discussing previously, and we've talked in person about this, we've met in the past, and something that I've been talking to other people and colleagues about this, right, was the fact that we don't hear a lot of rabbis, we especially even don't hear a lot of major Jewish organizations outside of one specifically focused on sustainability, talking about climate change within the Jewish community, from the pulpits, from weekly newsletters and stuff like that. Part of me wants to believe that maybe we shouldn't. There's so many other topics that need to get addressed that are particular to the Jewish community and for the Jewish community. Maybe if you're a Jew who's involved in, climate change, go find an organization that is devoted to climate change and repairing the environment in a way, in a way that works, and do that outside of the Jewish community and leave the Jewish community issues that are specifically Jewish related.
Well, if you said that to me a month ago, then I might have said something different. But as you just mentioned, Canada's been affected by a record-setting series of wildfires. It's affected 11 provinces and territories, burned 13 million acres, which is over 5 million hectares. And there are 385 active wildfires as of last week. 130 of them were deemed uncontrollable, meaning the Canadian Fire Service is not able to control those fires. And so to say that, leave the climate crisis to the environmentalists, and the Jewish community can just focus on its own issues of, addressing anti-Semitism and focusing on Jewish education, etc. So I would say, this is affecting the Jewish community as well, and we're all in the same boat, so we need to really work on this together.
What is the case for the fact that this might be an actual Jewish issue?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is that since Jews are also inhabitants of the earth, we are, Adam is from the Adamah, and so we are in this together. Jews are not, we don't have a get out of free card in regards to living sustainably here. And so I would say that we have to contribute our part just as any other people in the world. That's one aspect of it. But a second aspect of it is that the Jews have a special role to play in the world. And we see that mentioned in the Torah. One of my teachers, when I was studying in Jerusalem a number of years ago, likened it to a ship. So the Jews are a small people, but we're sort of like the rudder on the ship to change the direction, to determine the direction of the ship. So Jews have a leadership role to play in helping all of humanity live sustainably. And that's part of our tafkid, part of our mission and our responsibility here, in my opinion.
One of the things that I've noticed, right, is that if we are that people and the place that we have chosen to claim as our piece of land, or that God gave us as a piece of land, is Israel, I find that there are large swaths of the country or large parts of the population where sustainability isn't that big of an issue, right? I think Israel, the statistic that I have heard, that Israel is one of the world leaders in consumption of single-use plastics and consumables, and there's a lot of litter everywhere. There are places where Israel is a leader in terms of sustainability, in terms of desalination plants and greening the desert and various other power, because there's not a lot of oil is expensive going to Israel, so there's needs a lot of alternative energy sources. But there's a lot of places where Israel as a country and Israelis as a people could be doing so much better. Do you notice that? I mean, you're speaking to us from Jerusalem. Is this something that you have seen and you wish would be different, or do you have a different experience than that?
Yeah, that is my impression as well. As I was picking up my daughter from school yesterday and walking her back home, she asked me, why does the air in Jerusalem smell like smoke? And I explained to her, well, it's because part of the Jerusalem forest is burning. So there's another example of how Israel, which is more vulnerable to climate change than Canada, although Canada is also, as you're seeing, not exempt, we're feeling it here. And the fact that, Israel has one of the highest per capita consumption of disposable plastics and one of the highest per capita consumption of chicken shows that there's a long way to go in terms of sort of moving the needle on sustainability, especially within religious communities. This is, a lot of people think that religion is one thing and ecology is another thing. That, religion is this, we study sacred texts and we pray and we gather in houses of worship. And then ecology is, walking in nature, and it's these tree huggers and, environmentalists, climate scientists. Well, no, actually, there's a deep connection between the two. And it pains me to see that, in religious communities of different faiths, it's not just within the Jewish community, that there's this disconnect between sustainability and spirituality, and that my vision is for a religious practice that is encompassing of ecological practice. And so when I see the opposite, when religious practice actually contributes to more consumptive behavior and more environmental degradation, so then I see the work we have to do.
I have to say, one of the best examples of technology I find in Israel is that Israel has managed to come up with the thinnest possible plastic to take something that is thicker than a plastic bag, but is able enough and stable enough to be a cup. Right? I don't know if you've noticed this, of people who have been to Israel, the plastic cups in Israel are so incredibly thin, but they manage to stand up and they manage to be used. So they're not using as much plastic as anywhere else, because I guess they're thinking about resources. But one thing I find about Israel, I don't know if you've noticed this, if you can echo that, but like they manage to figure out how little in terms of resources to use, even though they're using so many of them.
It's an interesting observation, although I would venture to say that many of those plastic cups that you're referring to are actually made in China. So
yeah. What are some examples of your ability to, or the way that you think about the connection between spirituality and sustainability?
Well, one example is Jacob. There's a teaching in the book of Genesis that Yaakov crossed a stream as Esau was approaching it with a 400-man militia, and Jacob went back for small vessels. and risked his life to recover a few small vessels that he left on the other side of the stream. And the Talmud asks, well, why did he do it? And there's different explanations, some of them Hasidic, and one understanding, based on a more of a Hasidic understanding, is that he went back for these small cups because all of his possessions he considered as worthy of him raising up the holy sparks of holiness in them. And if he were to leave these cups on the other side of the stream and abandon them, then he would not fulfill his divine mission in using the physical unholiness. And so this relates to the other plastic cups you mentioned, because connecting to our possessions and using them many times and having durable resource use, whether it's clothing or cups or other things, that's part and parcel of being Jewish. It's, there's many teachings in the Talmud about concern for possessions, and not from a materialistic place, but from a place of responsibility, that here is a physical object that people have invested, especially in ancient times, a lot of time in hand making, and that God put in creation these holy sparks. And as spiritual people, we need to raise up those sparks through our conscious consumption of those items.
Fascinating. So the idea of like buying something for life and buying the best quality that you can so that it lasts longer, and having, fewer possessions but better ones, and ones that aren't going to be as disposable, is a way that, and imbuing that with a spiritual sense, and not just saying I'm doing it because I want to buy the best goods possible, but saying that that's what God wants of me is a good example of that, is what you're saying.
Yes, to spend more for products because then they'll last longer. And, I imagine some of the people listening to this have a piece of clothing that they have had for decades, that maybe they haven't worn it continuously for decades, but there's something that they've worn for many years. And when we do that, so we have a connection to that item, or maybe, ceramics that are the case with that. There's actually a Japanese practice of repairing broken pottery.
Kintsugi, right, with a little bit of gold in there. Yeah.
Right. And there's a teaching that Rabbi Yochanan, who was one of the great rabbis during the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, that after he left Jerusalem and he was on his deathbed in Yavne, he said to his students to remove the vessels from his room, because when he died, his corpse would contaminate those vessels according to Jewish laws of purity. And then in those times, they would have had to destroy those earthenware vessels. So one of the last things he did was to tell his students to remove those vessels, because he was concerned that in his passing, he would inadvertently contaminate durable vessels. So that's another example of a tzaddik, a righteous Jew, who's concerned about physical things even in the last moment of his life.
I'm sure you've gotten this, or you've heard this from various areas, various members of the Jewish community. There are definitely people who are out there who are very vocal sometimes, and they say, look, the climate is changing, maybe we're clearly looking at it, but this is clearly the way God has set up the world. And if God set up the world like this, either this is what God wants, or God will come up with a solution and things are going to change, but I don't have to do anything. My part is not to go and do. My part is to consume the world and to be part of it, and to conquer the land, so to speak. And so I don't have to worry about climate change or sustainability. I don't have to change any of my habits. What do you say to people that say that?
Well, first, in your description of to conquer the land, so to speak, I would just remove the so to speak, that there are many religious people, Jews and Christians, who understand Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and conquer it and dominate the animals and the fish and the birds, to be literal, that God has given humanity license to run roughshod over creation. But Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook, who was the first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, said that it's impossible to think that the creator of the world would want us to dominate and degrade the creation that God has made, because God is a benevolent creator. And so God created us for there to be life and blessing on this planet, and not the opposite. There's definitely a prevalent theology among many religious people from many different religions who believe that climate change is part of God's plan, and that we just need to sort of accept it and celebrate it and embrace it because it's actually going to be good for everyone. And it's, whether it's going to bring the Armageddon and the end of days, and it's going to herald the Messianic era. Well, I hope that their theology is right, because I'm, devoting myself day and night to try to promote a livable planet for my children. The problem is that I don't see any basis in our sacred texts, and I haven't actually seen a basis in other religions' sacred texts that say that if we act irresponsibly and degrade God's creation, that God is just going to sort of wave a magic wand, or the Messiah is going to wave a magic wand, and all of the problems are going to go away. All the plastic pollution is just going to evaporate, all the nuclear pollution, all the climate, all the carbon in the atmosphere. I have yet to see a real scriptural source that says that. And whereas on the other hand, and that's part of the work that Rabbi Leo D and I did in Eco Bible, is to provide an ecological commentary on 400 verses in the Torah that draws on rabbinic tradition and draws on thousands of years of Jewish wisdom, to reveal that actually God wants us to care for creation. It's similar. Like if somebody eats unhealthily and doesn't exercise and just, eats donuts all day, and then to say, well, no, God will just take care of me. It's that famous joke about, God sending a helicopter and a ship, etc. Like God gives this, and this is an important Jewish principle. And Rabbi Jonathan Sacks talks about this, and a lot of Jewish thinkers, that we have to take responsibility. In fact, Rabbi Soloveitchik said, there's this famous quote from Descartes of cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Rabbi Soloveitchik said, I heard this from my teacher, Rabbi Riskin, I am, therefore I am responsible. That by virtue of our being on this planet, it means we need to take responsibility.
On the flip side of that, one of the biggest challenges to religious discussions around sustainability, I find, is the movement that discusses zero population growth as one of the most important tenets of sustainability, that the more people we have on this planet, the more we are going to kill it. And yet that seems to come directly up against a Jewish principle, which is to be fruitful and multiply, which you just mentioned. Is there something of a way in which Judaism balances this, or the way you see that we should be balancing this?
It's an important question, and it's something that we do relate to in the book Eco Bible. So first of all, as you're aware, according to the rabbinic understanding of be fruitful and multiply, a couple fulfills that commandment by having one boy and one girl. So in other words, 2 children is a fulfillment of the Torah commandment to be fruitful and multiply. And yet there is most Orthodox rabbis today are supportive of having larger families than that, especially within the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox community, where the average woman, I believe, has about 8 children. And that's not only true among Jews, but in most of the population growth in the world is because of religious families, whether they're Muslim or Christian or Hindu, etc. And I actually had an interesting conversation with the Archbishop of Burundi, who is the Archbishop, the Anglican Archbishop of one of the poorest countries in the world. There are 11 million people there, and 1 million have already fled from the instability there. And according to many scientists, there will be no trees in Burundi in 25 years. They will have cut down every single tree. And I said to the Archbishop, where the population growth is high, and what do you think about be fruitful and multiply? And he said to me, yeah, we fulfilled that commandment, and now we need to focus on living sustainably. And it's interesting because in the first chapter of Exodus, there's parallel language to the first chapter of Genesis. In the first chapter of Exodus, it says that the Jewish people were fruitful and multiplied and swarmed and increased very much, and the land was filled with them. And so according to archaeologists, there were probably about between 500,000 and 1 million Jews, Israelites in ancient Egypt at the time, out of a total population of 3 million Egyptians. And so the Torah itself is using language to imply that the land was filled at that moment in Egypt with the Israelites. And so at this moment in history, where there's now 104 million people in Egypt, including several hundred who just drowned in the sea because they were going on a rickety boat trying to go from Libya to Italy to escape Egypt because it can't support them now. And now that we're at 8 billion people and moving toward 11 billion people, with the sustainability crisis that we have, and to say on top of all of this that it's a religious imperative to continue to have, 4, 8, 10, 12 children, I think that the clergy in the world need to have a serious reckoning about this question, because it's not the whole sustainability picture. Consumption is really a very big driver of the ecological crises, but population is a multiplier to it as well.
Leave us with one last bit that you think every Jew, as a Jewish practice, can change what they are doing in order to do something a little bit more for the world.
I would say that I would encourage people to be a reducitarian.
Okay.
Reducitarian means if you can eat less meat, dairy, eggs, fish, then go for it. Because especially red meat, but also other animal products, have an outsized impact in driving the multiple ecological crises that we're facing. And especially in a time when plant-based products are available and essentially taste the same as hamburgers and other animal products, it's not a lot of skin off our back to make that switch to plant-based, and we do a lot of good in the process. And in fact, the first chapter of Genesis, God says to people, eat plants. God says to animals, eat plants. And it was so. And Chief Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook said 100 years ago that vision of the first chapter of Genesis is not lost for all times, but there will be a time when we come back to it. And a lot of rabbis today think that time has come.
Rabbi Yonatan Neril, in addition to heading that organization, the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, you're the co-author of the Eco Bible, and you also do lead Jewish Eco Seminars. Where do people find out about these?
JewishEcoSeminars.com. We
Excellent.
do Jewish ecological tourism in Jerusalem and Israel for people visiting the land.
Rabbi Yonatan Neril, thanks so much for coming on Bonjour Chai.
Thank you so much. Bonjour.
And now it's time to show for our Nachas of the week. Phoebe, what's your Nachas this week?
My nachas, Avi, is going to be a New Yorker article by the philosopher at the University of Chicago, my own and your alma mater, right?
Yes.
Agnes Callard. Good old Agnes Callard.
Oh my goodness. This is like, have we reached 3 times in Nachas just for Agnes Callard?
She's anything Agnes Callard has done or been discussed about. She's just everywhere. Is she running off with a grad student, but ethically or apparently? Is she not giving her children their Halloween candy? This was another thing she once famously tweeted, that she took away her children's Halloween candy, and this was very... that was the discourse for that day. But anyway, this article is called The Case Against Travel, and she basically argues that travel is supposed to be sort of transformative, and people imagine it's like this noble thing to do, but actually it's not. And people got very angry at the article. People loved the article. People had all different sorts of responses. So I would recommend reading the article, and if you are so inclined, doing a search for it, either on Twitter or on Google or wherever you do your searches, and reading why people are, like, how people are responding.
I'm waiting to hear the responses, because I did read the article and it resonated a lot with me as a person who doesn't necessarily feel the need to travel to feel alive. So yeah, put this one on your list. Absolutely.
And Avi, what have you got?
I had something that was announced. I have not yet watched it, but it seems fascinating enough that I want to shout it out. There is a new short film coming out in about a month or so from Reboot Studios, which does a lot of Jewish cultural-y sort of things, called The Anne Frank Gift Shop. And the plot summary from IMDb says, is there a wrong way to talk about the Holocaust? That's the vital question at the heart of the Anne Frank Gift Shop, a dark comedy about anti-Semitism that packs a vital and timely message. When a high-end design firm presents its plans to reimagine the gift shop at the Anne Frank house, the company's overt appeal to Gen Z sparks a debate about collective trauma, the Holocaust, and tote bags.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so that sounds amazing, and I think that's what this theater camp should be doing a production of. Absolutely. Find the script for that, and there you have it. That's amazing. I can't wait to see that.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was another wonderful week. As always, happy long weekend, Phoebe.
You
Canada
too.
Day?
Is it right, Canada Day. I was going to think, which holiday is it? It's Canada Day, so it is. Happy Canada Day or
I
not.
remember
If you observe it.
I was dating. Do you know how much I observe this Canada Day?
No, how much do you observe Canada Day?
That's right. It's a good question. Avi, how much do you observe Canada Day? So on one of my earliest dates, I asked my wife when her birthday was, my now wife. We were still dating at the time. She goes, July 1st. And I said, wait, you mean like Canada Day? And she goes, yeah. So now, not only do I get to celebrate my country's birth, I celebrate the birth of my wife and the birth of my mother.
Oh my goodness.
So my mother, my wife, and my country all have the same birthday, and I can tell you that it can get very stressful. And so happy birthday to my wife, Rachel. Happy birthday to my mother. Happy birthday to Canada this weekend, and enjoy the long weekend. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending July 1st, Shabbat Parashat Chukat Balak. The show is produced and edited this week by Michael Freeman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is always one of the best ways we get new listeners. As always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. I'm Avi Feingold.
I'm Phoebe Maltz-Bovey.